The usher's hand brushed mine, light but insistent, steering me away from the front row I'd chosen in my head for weeks. My name wasn't on the chair draped in silk and sunlight. Savannah's dog sat there instead, a velvet bow tie at its throat, surveying the vineyard like it owned the place. I smoothed my dress, felt the cold metal of a folding chair bite through the silk, and kept my spine straight. They thought they'd made a statement. They had. Before we start the story, tell me where you're tuning in from, and don't forget to subscribe. The vineyard looked like a magazine spread, low country charm dressed in crystal stemware and ivory linens. Meredith Langston arrived early, her pale silk dress falling in smooth, practiced lines, her pearl comb anchored perfectly in her hair. The late afternoon light glazed the rows of grapevines in gold, and for a moment she thought, perhaps, this would still be a day worth remembering. An usher in a wrinkled linen jacket approached. "Mrs. Langston, right this way." His tone was polite, but brisk, like someone following instructions they didn't understand. She followed him toward the ceremony area, her eyes naturally drawn to the front row. Cushioned Chiavari chairs draped in soft chiffon. Savannah's family already sat there, all pastel hats and polite smiles. Meredith's heart steadied itself, ready to take her place. Instead, the usher veered left, straight toward a back row of folding metal chairs sinking slightly into the lawn. "Surely there's been a mistake," she murmured, her voice as even as if she were critiquing a mismatched lamp in a showroom. He hesitated, eyes flicking toward the front. "Bride's instructions, ma'am." Meredith sat, the metal pressed cold through the silk. From here, she could see her rightful place, occupied instead by Savannah's Maltipoo, perched on a floral cushioned chair. The little dog wore a velvet bow tie, its head cocked like royalty, surveying the crowd. Jamie appeared near the arbor, scanning faces until he found hers. His lips shaped a muted, "sorry." But the music swelled before anything more could pass between them. Meredith's knuckles whitened around her clutch. She didn't look away. The vows blurred into a haze of violin strings and murmured laughter. The dog barked once when Savannah adjusted her train, and the guests chuckled. No one turned to see Meredith's jaw tighten, her spine perfectly straight, despite the uncomfortable chair. At the reception, the scent of seared fish and buttered biscuits mingled with candle smoke. Savannah stood, flute in hand. "To chosen family," she said, her drawl sweet as syrup. Then, looking directly at Meredith, "and well-trained dogs." Laughter rippled across the tables. Meredith lifted her glass just enough to reflect the light, then set it down untouched. She left before the cake was cut. The path to her car wound past blooming jasmine, its scent clean and heady in the warm night. She walked slowly, each step deliberate, the click of her heels a metronome for the thought settling into place. At home, she hung her dress, removed her pearls, and crossed to her study. The air in the room smelled faintly of lemon oil and old paper. She unlocked the bottom drawer of her mahogany desk and drew out a thick leather binder, the gold embossing still sharp after decades. Langston Family Trust. Her fingertips rested on the clasp for a moment before she whispered, "Let's begin." The clink of porcelain cups and the low hum of conversation wrapped around Meredith as she stepped into the magnolia room. The place smelled faintly of buttered grits and magnolia blossoms, just as it had 20 years ago, when she and Rosa Bennett had sealed more deals than most men in Charleston could dream of. Rosa was already seated by the window, a sharp silhouette in a dove-gray blazer. Her silver hair was pulled into a low twist, her reading glasses perched halfway down her nose as she signed something with the precision of a surgeon. Meredith slid into the seat across from her. "No greetings, no pleasantries." "Everything I gave them," she said softly. "I want eyes on it." Rosa looked up slowly, letting the words settle like dust in sunlight. You want scorched earth? She asked, setting her pen aside. Or surgical strike? Meredith reached for her coffee, the steam curling toward her face. Elegance, she said, with receipts. The waiter appeared with their usual shrimp and grits for Rosa, a garden omelet for Meredith. They barely touched the plates. Instead, Rosa pulled out a slim leather folio and began scribbling notes as Meredith listed items. The Kiowa Island lot, the pearl strand from Paris, the SUV, yes, the white one she uses for her photos, and the antique dining set, the one she calls hers. Meredith's tone never lifted beyond conversational. And the house? Rosa asked. Meredith's lips curved just enough to be noticed. Oh, that will be dessert. They moved on to the accounts. Investment portfolios. Joint ventures Jamie had asked her to seed. Even a few subscription boxes she'd set up, just to help them start out. Rosa's pen danced over the page. When they finished, Rosa leaned back, adjusting her glasses. You're legally covered on all of it. Gave it without transferring ownership? Left the title in your name? Then it's yours to unwind. Meredith dabbed her lips with her napkin, the way she'd been taught as a girl. Then unwind it. Rosa smirked. This will make the Christmas party awkward. Christmas parties are for family, Meredith said. I'm simply correcting the guest list. They lingered only long enough for Rosa to settle the bill. Outside, the Charleston air was soft, but held a faint bite of salt from the harbor. Meredith drew in a slow breath, feeling something inside her, something that had gone dormant, stir to life. By evening, the inventory was scanned, categorized, and locked behind Rosa's double-encrypted client portal. Meredith sat at her desk, the lamplight warm on her hands, and took out a stack of thick cream stationery. She wrote slowly, her pen gliding with the ease of someone who knew the weight of ink on paper. Dear Savannah, thank you for including me in your beautiful celebration. The floral arrangement was exquisite, and the vineyard was a charming choice. She paused, letting her pen hover, then added the postscript. P.S. Loved the dog's seat. She sealed it with a crimson wax stamp, the Langston crest, and slid it into an envelope. The first item Meredith took back was the Waterford crystal set. She remembered the exact moment she'd given it, wrapped in silver paper, tied with a velvet ribbon, Savannah's smile just a shade too wide for gratitude. The card had read, "To start your forever with something timeless." Meredith had meant it then. Now timeless just meant easy to reclaim. She wrapped each glass in tissue herself, feeling the cool weight settle into her palm before placing it into a padded crate. The stemware caught the morning light streaming through the French doors of her home, scattering rainbows across her dining room wall. It was almost festive, if you ignored the reason. By mid-morning, her attorney had filed the paperwork to revoke the title for the white SUV, the same one Savannah posed with for her Charleston Life Instagram feed. It had always been a loan in Meredith's name, insurance in hers, and Savannah's hand on the wheel. The repossession request went through without delay. The antique dining set was next. Cherrywood, hand-carved, passed down from Meredith's grandmother. She'd loaned it to the couple for their new home, knowing full well she'd never see it again unless she made the move herself. So she did. The movers arrived precisely at 11, two polite men in navy polos, hands clean, boots wrapped to protect hardwood floors. Meredith directed them with a designer's precision. Table first, then the sideboard. Watch the wall by the staircase. It's narrow. They worked quietly, the kind of silence that leaves room for the echo of intention. At the same time, across town, Savannah was wrapping up a live-streamed unboxing of her latest PR mailer. When she walked into her walk-in closet an hour later, she found a blank wall where her custom-built glass shelving had once been. Only faint outlines in the paint showed where her displays of heels and handbags used to stand. Her phone lit up almost immediately after. Jamie. What's going on? Meredith. Rebalancing. No explanation, no apology, just the truth, stripped of sugar. By the afternoon, Rosa had drafted a formal letter on embossed stationery, the kind that made recipients sit up a little straighter before they'd even opened it. It revoked all use of the Langston Legacy brand name, which Savannah had been milking for social clout and product lines. Meredith's family name was not a prop for curated Southern aesthetics. When Rosa emailed a PDF of the signed letter, Meredith read it twice before forwarding it to Savannah's Business Inquiries account. She pictured her daughter-in-law opening it in her rose gold home office, the scent of a diptyque candle clinging to the air, confusion turning to indignation in real time. Evening settled in over Charleston, warm and heavy with the scent of gardenias. Meredith sat on her porch with a glass of iced tea, watching the last traces of sun slide across the horizon. The crates were stacked neatly in her foyer, crystal, china, silver, awaiting their new destinations. Some would return to her cabinets. Some would be sold. The funds rerouted to projects Savannah would never be invited to attend. Her phone buzzed with a notification. Instagram. Savannah had posted a photo, her hand resting on the Maltipoo's head, expression somewhere between wounded and regal. The caption read, "When toxic in-laws act like loan sharks? Ladies, guard your energy." The first click of the keyboard was satisfying, like the sound of a lock turning in her favor. Meredith sat in her study, the lamplight pooling across neat stacks of documents, her checkbook, and her laptop. With a few keystrokes, she canceled the monthly automatic transfer that had been feeding Jamie and Savannah's joint account for the past 4 years. The money was supposed to cover unexpected expenses, but lately, those expenses had a suspicious habit of looking like weekend getaways and champagne brunches. The online confirmation popped up. Transfer canceled. Meredith leaned back, tapping the pen against her palm. It was remarkable how little noise it made to change the course of someone's life. Next, she reached for the manila folder Rosa had flagged in red ink. Charleston House, Lien Clause. A legal safeguard, quietly inserted years ago when Meredith had gifted the down payment on their home. Rosa had insisted it be structured as a secured loan, payable only if certain terms were met. Terms Savannah and Jamie had breached months ago without even knowing it. Meredith signed the recall paperwork in smooth, deliberate strokes. Her late husband used to say she had the most intimidating signature in South Carolina. She hoped that still held true. By noon, Jamie was calling. His voice had that frantic edge that only came when his perfect world was wobbling. "Mom, the bank just called. Something's happening with the house. This affects both of us." Meredith pressed the phone to her ear, watching a pair of mourning doves outside her window. "Correct," she said simply. A silence stretched between them before Jamie muttered something about working it out and hung up. She imagined him relaying the news to Savannah, the crash of her perfectly curated facade, when she realized the crown jewel in her brand, their historic Charleston home, wasn't as secure as she thought. Within days, the ripples spread. Savannah's Charleston Life sponsorships began to falter. Without the verified property backdrop for her shoots, the charm of her persona seemed diminished. Brands quietly pulled out, emails went unanswered, and her calendar, once dotted with influencer luncheons and charity photo ops, began to clear. Meredith didn't bother to gloat. She simply met Rosa for coffee at their usual cafe, the one with creaky floors and perfect cappuccinos. Rosa slid over the next document, an amendment to Meredith's estate plan. Every future distribution to Jamie was frozen until further notice, legally binding, ironclad. "This is the quiet part," Rosa said, sipping her coffee. "The part they won't even hear until the rest of the noise stops." Meredith smiled. Perfect. That afternoon, she took a slow walk through her garden. The azaleas were starting to bloom, bursts of pink against deep green leaves. She thought about all the times she'd been told she was old money, as though it were some static, inherited condition. They forgot that even old money has a pulse, and she still controlled the heartbeat. When she returned to the house, her mail was waiting in the brass box by the door. Nestled between a property tax notice and a glossy travel brochure was a thick, cream-colored envelope. The gold-foiled lettering on the front was unmistakable: the Legacy Women's Gala, hosted by Savannah Reed Langston. Inside was an invitation on heavy cardstock, embossed with swirling script, and a list of sponsors that used to court Meredith's approval. The irony was almost too rich. Meredith let the invitation rest between her fingers for a long moment before setting it down beside her teacup. She reached for her pen, already knowing her RSVP would be the first move in a game Savannah didn't even realize she was losing. The invitation sat on Meredith's desk like a gaudy dare. The embossed gold foil screamed opulence, the type Savannah favored when she wanted to look established. Across the top, in large, confident script, the Legacy Women's Gala, hosted by Savannah Reed Langston. Meredith traced her finger over the hyphenated surname, her lips tightening. Savannah hadn't just taken Jamie's name, she had taken hers, plastering Langston across a night that would be dripping with champagne and whispered networking deals. But the truth was simple. Savannah had no legal right to it. Not anymore. She picked up her fountain pen, signed a single sheet of paper, and slid it into the cream envelope Rosa had couriered over that morning. Cease and desist. Unauthorized use of the Langston name in promotions. The next step was more satisfying. She clicked Decline on the online RSVP portal. No excuses, no polite regrets. Just a simple digital number. By that evening, Savannah had found a way to perform her indignation. Meredith's phone pinged with a notification, an Instagram Live. Savannah, in a silk robe and perfect curls, sipped from a crystal flute while speaking to her audience. Some people, Savannah purred, think they can control what others achieve. But confidence, style, those can't be revoked. The comments scrolled by in a blur. Hearts, supportive emojis, the occasional barbed question Savannah ignored. Meredith closed the app without a word. Meanwhile, Rosa's assistant, Janine, was already in motion. Every brand and sponsor attached to the gala received a short, direct email. The use of the Langston name in your marketing materials is legally contested. Please advise your client to remove or replace it immediately to avoid formal legal action. The fallout was immediate. By the next morning, the gala's Eventbrite listing had been edited. No Langston name, just Savannah Reed, host and community leader. Meredith didn't smile, but her coffee tasted especially smooth that morning. Later, she sat across from Rosa in the private meeting room of their bank. The wood-paneled walls and heavy leather chairs always reminded Meredith of her father's office, a place where decisions were never made twice. On the polished table between them sat a stack of documents labeled Langston Women's Educational Trust. "This," Rosa said, tapping the folder, "is how you make it permanent." The trust was airtight, legally shielded from any claim Jamie or Savannah could attempt. Every cent Meredith had once planned to pass to her son's family would now be redirected to scholarships, grants, and mentorship programs for women whose lives had been constrained by the same kind of condescension Savannah had tried to cloak in lace and lilies. Meredith flipped through the pages, the scent of fresh ink rising as she signed her name again and again. With each flourish of her pen, she felt lighter, sharper, more herself. When the last page was signed, Rosa clasped her hand. "Once this is filed, it's irrevocable. Even if you wanted to undo it, you couldn't." "I know," Meredith said. "That's the point." That evening, as she read on her porch with the spring air humming around her, her phone buzzed. A text from Jamie. Are you really cutting us off? She stared at the screen for a long moment, the cicadas pulsing in the background. Then she opened her photo gallery, snapped a picture of the trust's status page, filed and irrevocable, and sent it without a single word. She watched the read receipt appear under her message, then set the phone down. Somewhere, in a perfectly curated Charleston kitchen, a glass would be shattering. The check was heavier than it should have been. Ink and paper weighed in resolve. Meredith slid it across the mahogany desk to the university chancellor, her alma mater's seal glinting in the afternoon light. I want it endowed, she said, perpetual, and tied to the name Langston, forever. The chancellor adjusted her glasses, eyes widening as she read the figure. The Langston Women's Endowment, she murmured. It will change lives. That's the point, Meredith replied, her voice calm but edged. It's time that name stood for something worth inheriting. Within weeks, the announcement splashed across the university's homepage. Langston Women's Endowment announced, empowering future female leaders. The press release carried her portrait. Silver hair perfectly coiffed, gaze steady, the Langston crest embroidered discreetly on her lapel. She met the first group of applicants in a sunlit conference room lined with bookshelves. The air smelled faintly of paper and old wood polish, like the private study her father used to keep. Each young woman told her story, first in her family to attend college, survivor of domestic abuse, a mother returning to school at 42. Their voices trembled, but their eyes blazed with the kind of determination Meredith recognized in her own reflection decades ago. You're all here because someone once underestimated you, she told them, pouring tea into delicate porcelain cups. Let that be the last time. That night, Savannah saw the headline. Someone had sent her the link. The Langston crest. Meredith's name. An endowment she had no part in. Her curated smile didn't hide the tightening around her eyes as she scrolled, wineglass poised midair. The next morning, Jamie called. His tone was cautious, the way one speaks to a sleeping bear. Mom, let's not make this bigger than it is, he began. Meredith was silent for a beat. Then, it's always been this big, Jamie. You just sat down second row. He sighed. Savannah? Savannah made her choices. Now I'm making mine. After the call, Meredith opened the thick leather binder that held her estate plans. The gold-embossed cover creaked faintly as she turned the pages. In clean, deliberate strokes, she signed the amendment Rosa had drafted, Clause 17. Any individual not bearing the legal name Langston shall be ineligible to receive inheritance, bequest, or trust disbursement. No name, no claim. It wasn't about money anymore. It was about definition. She had watched Savannah wrap herself in the Langston name like it was couture, parading it across social media and press releases. Now, Meredith was cutting the tag off that borrowed garment. A week later, Savannah's assistant opened an email from an unfamiliar law firm. Inside, notice of trademark conflict, immediate action required. The continued use of the Langston name in your business branding constitutes infringement. Savannah's business, the one she had built on monogrammed linens, branded cookware, and carefully staged photo shoots, was staring down a legal clock. 30 days to strip every vestige of Langston from her empire, or face a lawsuit she couldn't win. In Meredith's quiet study, the scent of fresh jasmine from her garden drifted in through the open window. She sipped her tea, the trademark notice open on her laptop. Somewhere across town, Savannah was reading the same document, but Meredith was the only one smiling. The air inside Meredith's Charleston home smelled of rosemary and roasting duck, the kind of scent that lingered in one's memory long after the plates were cleared. The dining room glowed under the soft light of her vintage chandelier, each crystal prism casting rainbows on the white linen tablecloth. 8 place settings gleamed. bone china rimmed in gold, polished silverware, and crimson cloth napkins folded like camellias. Her guest list was carefully curated. Rosa, of course, seated to her right. Dr. Whitaker, a retired literature professor who'd once mentored her son. Three of her former design apprentices, now thriving in their own careers. And two neighbors who had quietly supported her during the post-wedding frost. Meredith, this is... Rosa set down her wine glass, glancing around the room. Perfect, as always. Meredith smiled, her pearls catching the light. Perfection is the least I can offer the people who've earned a seat here. As the evening unfolded, the conversation was a mix of nostalgia, playful debates about books and politics, and bursts of laughter that rang against the high ceilings. Rosa told an outrageous story about a client's disastrous kitchen remodel, and one of Meredith's former students recounted a design pitch gone comically wrong. At one point, Meredith caught her reflection in the mirror above the sideboard. Her eyes were bright, her posture tall, her laughter unforced. It was a face she hadn't seen at her own table in years. Unbeknownst to her guests, a photographer friend she'd invited captured candid shots throughout the evening. Meredith leaning in to listen, head thrown back in mid-laugh, hands gracefully folded as she watched others speak. The next day, those photos, under the cheeky caption number Grand Dame Goals, circulated on a local lifestyle blog. Jamie saw them first. Sitting in his office, scrolling absently, his thumb froze over an image of his mother raising her glass, Rosa laughing beside her. He forwarded the link to Savannah. "She looks happy," he typed. Savannah replied in less than a minute. Let her have her moment. Meredith didn't wait for their commentary. That afternoon, she selected her favorite shot, a soft focus image of her hand resting on Rosa's as they laughed, and texted it directly to Jamie. This is what family looks like. No explanation, no defense. Just that. Later, after her guests had gone and the last wineglass was washed, Meredith drove to her bank. The manager greeted her warmly and escorted her to a private room. She reached into her handbag for the small brass key and opened the safety deposit box marked with a discreet label, "Reclaimed." Inside were artifacts of a life carefully built, then carelessly disrespected. A stack of receipts for wedding gifts she'd personally purchased, monogrammed linens, a Waterford crystal vase, the custom cutlery set Savannah had bragged about online. Original titles for the SUV and the downtown condo, both recently repossessed. A single photograph of Jamie at age 5, missing a front tooth, holding up a sandcastle they'd built together. Her fingers lingered on the photograph. She slipped it into a smaller envelope inside the box, sealing it with a quiet finality. That night, as Charleston's street lamps bathed the sidewalks in amber, Meredith poured herself a nightcap and opened her laptop. Her feed was awash with the dinner photos, compliments pouring in from acquaintances and strangers alike. Then her gaze caught on a different post, a story Savannah had uploaded in her signature, curated style. A photo of champagne flutes clinking, captioned in looping script, "When women confuse money with motherhood." Meredith set her glass down, the ice clinking against the crystal. Her smile was faint, but steady. Savannah had just confirmed one thing. This wasn't over. The letter from her IP attorney was printed on thick, cream stationery, the sort that made people sit up straighter when they read it. Meredith held it between her manicured fingers, scanning the formal language that felt as sharp as the scissors she used to trim roses. Revocation of trademark use. 30 days to comply. Failure will result in legal action. Rosa, seated across from her in the cafe, stirred her coffee with deliberate slowness. "You sure you want to go through with this?" Meredith didn't look up. They took the Langston name and used it to sell scented candles, faux heritage dishware, and overpriced picnic baskets. "I'm reclaiming it." They can rebrand as much as they like, without me. The next morning, the letter went out to Savannah's LLC, her brand sponsors, and every online platform tied to Langston Lifestyle Co. Within hours, Meredith's phone began pinging with news alerts. Savannah's pastel-toned website now bore a jarring black-and-white banner. Content under revision. 30 days wasn't a suggestion. It was a countdown clock. Meredith imagined Savannah in her home office, staring at her ring light and MacBook, trying to reimagine herself without the surname she'd treated like a trademark. By week 2, the ripple effects were visible. The Langston Luxe merch line was pulled from online boutiques. Event invitations suddenly listed Savannah as Savannah Reed, her maiden name, the one she rarely acknowledged. Social media bios were edited in a flurry, each change stripping away the borrowed prestige she had wrapped around herself like a silk scarf. On day 19, Rosa called. "You're going to want to hear this," she said, her tone edged with mischief. A popular business podcast had just dropped a new episode. The mother-in-law who sued her way out of erasure. The host dissected Meredith's legal maneuvers like a chess match, painting her as a southern grande dame who'd turned asset protection into an art form. Meredith listened to it in her study, sipping Earl Grey. The voice of the host, warm, intrigued, described her as a case study in reclaiming personal brand integrity. The phrase made her laugh. She'd never thought of herself as a brand before Savannah turned her life into one. The next morning, she opened her mailbox to find a neat stack of envelopes. Some were handwritten in careful cursive, others typed. She carried them inside, placed them on her mahogany desk, and slit them open one by one. "Thank you for reminding me I'm not powerless," one woman wrote. "My daughter-in-law is bleeding me dry. You give me hope," another confessed. Of course, there were others. One unsigned letter called her a vindictive hag. Another accused her of destroying your son's future. Meredith slid the hate mail into a slim black folder, the compliments into a green one. Both, she decided, were proof she'd made impact. That afternoon, Rosa stopped by, still in her tennis whites. She dropped her visor onto the counter and poured herself a lemonade. "You wanted silence," Rosa said, glancing at the stacks of mail and the paused podcast on Meredith's tablet. "Looks like you got a microphone instead." Meredith smiled faintly. Sometimes the echo is more useful than the quiet. It was early evening when her phone rang. The caller ID flashed Jamie. She let it ring twice before answering. There was no preamble, no warm-up, just his voice. Low, halting. "I was wrong." Meredith closed her eyes, letting the words settle in her chest like an unexpected gust of warm air through an open window. She didn't answer right away. Somewhere in her mind, she knew those 3 words weren't a surrender. They were a prelude. The message arrived a little after dusk, the hour when Charleston turns gold and then goes quiet. Meredith let the phone buzz against the mahogany, watched the tiny waveform pulse while Jamie's voice, older than she remembered, thinner too, said, "Mom, I was wrong." She didn't press play again. She left it there, cooling beside her tea, like a pie set on the sill for the air to harden. He came the next afternoon without warning. No Savannah, no dog. Just Jamie on the porch in a navy blazer he hadn't bothered to button, hair a little wild, a boy trying to dress up his regret. The doorbell's soft chime drifted through the foyer. Outside, Jasmine clung to the heat like perfume. "May I come in?" he asked. "You're already here," she said, and stepped back. They sat in the front parlor where the air held a faint lemon oil and old book scent. Light fell through lace curtains, striping the rug. Meredith poured Darjeeling the way her mother taught her, water just off boil, steeped to amber, no sugar. She handed him a cup and waited. "We were trying to blend new traditions," Jamie started, staring at the tea instead of her. His voice had the flatness of a practiced line. Savannah thought the front row was for her family, for optics. You were trying to vanish the one who built yours, Meredith said calmly. It wasn't a question. He winced. I thought, you didn't think, she said, not unkindly. You deferred. He swallowed. She watched the flex of his throat, the way his hand tightened around bone china. The familiar tick under his eye stirred. Childhood tells that once signaled lies about homework and broken pains. After Dad died, I tried to be the person who didn't need you, he said finally. The words tumbled out, graceless. And Savannah, she likes control. She said it would be best if we set boundaries. Meredith lifted her cup. The tea was strong and slightly floral, the way she liked it when she needed a steadying thing. She let silence widen like a porch before rain. When you don't fill it, people rush to fill it for you. He did. Words spilled. About sponsorships drying up. About unfair legal stuff that sounded suspiciously like proper contracts finally enforced. About how Savannah had cried when the website banner changed. How he hadn't slept. How the house now felt like a set. Mom, I know. I know. He stumbled. If we fix it, if we do the vow renewal and put you... He stopped, eyes breaking, the last word catching on the hook of his pride. He reached for a napkin and failed to use it, wiping at his face with the back of his hand the way he had at 8. For an instant, Meredith saw the boy with a gap-toothed grin, peanut butter on his chin, asking if they could eat dinner on the floor to watch the thunderstorms roll over the Cooper. She poured him more tea, said nothing. He cried harder in the quiet. The house held it with her, absorbing the sound into old wood, into the curve of the banister and the spine of the piano where he had learned Clair de Lune badly and passionately. When the sobs thinned to breath, she passed him the linen napkin his father used to tuck at his collar for crab nights and waited until he found his feet under him again. He looked up. What do you need from me? She considered the question the way she considered fabric swatches. Feeling for weight, finish, truth. You cannot pay for what never had a price, she said. You cannot rewrite what you did in front of witnesses. And you cannot ask me to audition for a seat at my own table. He nodded slowly, like the words were a language he recognized, but hadn't practiced in years. I miss you, he said. Meredith stood. I still live where I always have, she replied. It's the nearest thing to missing I can offer. At the door, he paused. Savannah wants to talk. She has publicists, Meredith said. She can talk to them. He flinched, then tried on a fiery smile that fit poorly. I'll call you, he said. You already did, she answered. After he left, the house exhaled. Meredith walked to her study, lifted the phone, and replayed the voicemail. Mom? I was wrong. She saved it to a folder labeled Voices with Dates and Times, a ledger of words held instead of used. Rosa stopped by at dusk, still in court shoes, foundations documents tucked under her arm. She listened to Meredith's pared-down account while slipping off her heels with a sigh. So, she said finally, what did you say to him? Nothing, Meredith replied, and poured 2 bourbons over a single cube. Silence is what they gave me. I'm letting it echo. They sat on the back porch as the light went blue, the cicadas raising a steady cry. Somewhere down the street, a wind chime answered. Rosa clinked her glass against Meredith's. To echoes, she said. The next morning, a heavy envelope arrived, cream stock bruised gold at the edges. The calligraphy flowed with ridiculous flourish. Meredith slid it open with her mother's letter opener and unfolded the card. James and Savannah Langston request the honor of your presence at our vow renewal. A celebration of family, front row reserved. Her eye slid to the bottom, sponsor logos crowding the margin, a hashtag suggestion, a line about restoring legacy. Meredith felt the faintest smile tug at her mouth. Restoration, indeed. Not hers. She set the invitation on the desk, the ink still smelling faintly of solvent, and rang Rosa. "We've been invited," she said evenly, "to a re-wedding, vow renewal." The venue was the same vineyard as before, though the weathered oak trees lining the drive seemed to lean closer now, as if they wanted to watch. Meredith's car crunched up the gravel path, tires slow, deliberate. She had dressed for the occasion, not in contrition, but in armor. A tailored dove-gray suit, silk scarf knotted perfectly, a single pearl at each ear. Her heels tapped like a metronome against the flagstones. The greeter, all smiles and overtrained enthusiasm, guided her inside. "We've got your seat, Ms. Langston, front row, right on the aisle." He said it like a peace offering. She followed him, her gaze taking in the details, the floral arch over the altar, the soft gold runner, and there it was. A white Chiavari chair with her name scripted in looping gold on the backrest. A cushion, this time. No dog. Savannah was already working the crowd. When she spotted Meredith, she floated over in a haze of chiffon and perfume, air kissing both cheeks like they were old friends rather than co-combatants. "Meredith," she cooed, drawing out the syllables. "We are just so glad you could make it. This is, well, it's about healing." Meredith's eyes moved past her to the rows of people pretending not to eavesdrop. "Is it?" she asked, her tone as even as her hairline. Jamie appeared beside his wife, a little paler than usual, hair slicked back like he was auditioning for sincerity. "We're starting fresh, Mom," he said, his hand hovering awkwardly at her elbow. "No games. No. History." She gave the smallest nod, enough to pass for agreement in a room that only wanted optics. She took her seat. The cushion was soft, the view perfect. The officiant began to speak about renewal and commitment. Words Meredith rolled around in her head like pebbles, finding them smooth but hollow. 5 minutes in, she stood. No noise, no fuss, just the whisper of wool skirt against stockings as she eased into the aisle. Heads turned, whispers swelled like wind through tall grass. Jamie's eyes widened. Savannah's smile faltered. Meredith bent slightly toward Savannah as she passed. Her voice was low, but it carried just enough to kiss the ears of the first 2 rows. "Fresh starts require compost," she murmured. "This soil's still poisoned." She didn't wait for a reply. The aisle stretched ahead of her like a clean line, the vineyard's double doors yawning open to the afternoon sun. She walked through them, each step echoing on the stone. Outside, the air was bright and sharp with the scent of grapevine and distant sea. She could hear the ceremony continuing behind her, the officiant's voice tinny and strained, trying to pull the mood back into place. Her car door shut with a sound that felt final. She sat for a moment, fingers on the steering wheel, watching the vineyard recede in the rearview mirror as she reversed down the path. The oak trees still leaned in, but now it seemed they were nodding. By the time she reached home, the sky was shifting into that molten gold she loved. Meredith walked into her study, set her bag down, and unlocked her phone. Her hands were steady as she opened her social media account. The cursor blinked in the empty text box. She typed a single sentence. "Some seats aren't worth reclaiming." She hit post. The screen lit up with the first pings of likes and shares almost immediately, but she set the phone face down on the desk. Outside, the wind moved through the magnolia leaves like applause. In another tab, a notification pulsed. Rosa had sent her a message. "Call me. I think you're going to like this next development." Rosa's text had been right. The next development wasn't a scandal. It was a spotlight. The morning after Meredith's post lit up Charleston's gossip mill, the university called. then a women's leadership council, then a law symposium that had read the podcast transcript twice. The Langston Endowment wasn't just a scholarship anymore, it was a signal fire. Mentorship, Meredith told the chancellor on the call, her voice steady, the scent of her lemon verbena candle mixing with the first dark roast of the day. The money opens doors, but I want a room on the other side. Chairs, a table, a place to be heard. By April, the endowment's homepage had a new tab. Mentors and mentees. They met on Thursday evenings in a paneled classroom that smelled of chalk dust, and old varnish. The women came with notebooks and nerves. They left with deadlines and a contact at a firm that would take their calls. Meredith taught in the language she knew best. Clear questions, clean lines, zero sentimentality masquerading as advice. The first thing you build isn't a resume, she said in one session, drawing a circle on the whiteboard. It's your perimeter. What you won't be, won't do, won't accept. Protect that with your life. Everything else can be redesigned. They wrote in a storm. One woman, a paramedic pivoting to public health, held her pen as if she were trying to sign herself into existence. Then came the invitations. A leadership luncheon at a hotel with chandeliers like upside-down gardens. A panel at a women-in-law conference where the moderator introduced her as the patron saint of boundary setting. Rosa became the gatekeeper. She wore reading glasses on a beaded chain and said no, like it was velvet. "You can do 3 in May," Rosa decreed, flipping open her black moleskin. "No more." "You're not a circuit preacher." Meredith smiled. "I prefer a pulpit with good lighting." Her first keynote took place in a ballroom that smelled faintly of citrus polish and ambition. The microphone felt cool in her hand. She spoke without notes, letting the story unspool in clean scenes. The wedding chair, the dog, the quiet portfolio, the paper that changed the weather. She watched heads tilt when she said, "They didn't erase me. They annotated themselves out." When she finished, the applause rose like surf. Press inquiries multiplied. Rosa triaged them on a folding table in Meredith's sunroom, drinking iced tea and ignoring the wind chimes clattering on the porch. "No to the reality show," Rosa muttered, tapping her pen against the arm of her glasses. "Maybe to Southern Monthly if they photograph you in the garden and not next to a ledger like your Dickens." "Agreed," Meredith said, slicing a lemon. "I prefer hydrangeas to hand-wringing." In June, a Langston scholar, Ava from the first cohort, the one who'd arrived with a thrift store blazer and eyes like flint, won a national award for a paper on elder exploitation statutes. Meredith watched the live stream on her tablet, the room filled with the late afternoon smell of cut grass and summer thunder rolling somewhere upriver. Ava's hands shook as she accepted the glass sculpture. "This is for the woman who told me my name could go on a building before any man let me in the door. Thank you, Ms. Langston." Meredith pressed her fingers to her mouth and let herself feel it. The contact of gratitude, meeting purpose. The mail kept coming. Some were typed, professional, crisp. Others were scrawled, coffee-stained, written late at night by hands that shook. A nurse wrote about a daughter-in-law who kept borrowing her debit card. A retired teacher sent photos of her pantry now stocked, with groceries she'd bought herself after canceling 4 helpful auto-pays. A woman named Maureen enclosed a broken key on a string and a note. "He took the house key. You gave me the lawyer's number. I got my own door back." There was hate mail, too, a trickle of bile that never rose beyond ankle deep. Rosa marked it, filed it, and shrugged. "Hydrangeas need compost," she said, waving a hand. "We turn this into flowers." One humid evening, thunderheads bruising the horizon, Meredith opened a fresh legal pad and wrote the title at the top in block letters. Polite, patient, prepared to strike. The first line came like a problem she'd already solved. "They confused my quiet for consent." She wrote until the lightning snapped and the house shuddered, the ink glistening wet under the desk lamp. By August, 3 of her talks had been uploaded and clipped by strangers into bite-sized wisdom. A particular sentence, "You cannot invite me to the table I built and call it generosity," trended for a week in corners of the internet Meredith had never intended to visit. Rosa showed her on the iPad. "People love a sentence they can stitch on a pillow," she said. "They can buy the pillow from someone else," Meredith replied. "We're out of home decor." The calls she ignored said as much as the ones she returned. A TV producer with a voice like a credit card machine, a brand that wanted to license her signature for a line of heritage candles. Rosa answered that one, not unless the wick is an affidavit. One afternoon, as they sorted the latest stack on the sunlit rug, Rosa's phone buzzed. She frowned, looked closer, and then her eyebrows shot up in a way that made her look 10 years younger. "You're going to savor this," she said, handing over the screen. It was an email from the IP firm. Subject line, "Final determination, read mark." Savannah, stripped of Langston, had tried to plant her flag in her maiden name. The application was crisp, aspirational, bristling with categories: lifestyle goods, branded cookware, events. The decision from the board was terser than a southern drawl on a bad day. Application denied. Likelihood of confusion with existing marks, insufficient distinctiveness, evidence of bad faith association with previously contested brand. Meredith read it twice, the cool of the air conditioner kissing the back of her neck, the lemon verbena candle reduced to a thin pool of wax. She felt a sensation that wasn't joy so much as accuracy, like a picture finally level on the wall. "Tell our counsel thank you," she said, handing the phone back, "and send Ava the case memo. She'll enjoy the footnotes." Rosa grinned, already typing. "Sometimes the universe signs your paperwork for you." It was a Tuesday morning when the envelope slid through the brass mail slot, tan, official, and stamped with Charleston County's seal. Meredith's coffee had barely cooled when she slid it open. Inside, a tax delinquency notice addressed to Jamie and Savannah Langston. Amount due, $18,473.52. The smell of paper and ink seemed sharper than usual. She read the fine print twice. The property, she remembered, was still partially secured through a loan she had co-signed 3 years ago, back when she believed starter home meant something more than a prop for Savannah's lifestyle reels. Meredith set the letter on the kitchen counter, the lemon light from the east-facing window catching on the embossed county seal. She didn't call Jamie, she called Rosa. "They've defaulted," Meredith said, her tone like a blade laid flat. There was a brief pause on the other end, then Rosa's voice, dry as good sherry. "Well, that makes this cleaner." By noon, Rosa was at the dining table, glasses low on her nose, files fanned out like a dealer's hand. "Because you're a co-signer," Rosa explained, tapping the tax notice with her pen. "You're within your rights to secure the property to cover your liability, and given their outstanding debts, the court won't need much persuading." Meredith leaned back, listening to the faint hum of cicadas outside, the weight of the summer heat pressing against the glass. "Let's persuade quickly." The process was surgical. Rosa filed the necessary petitions, citing the lien clause Meredith had insisted on back when she'd signed the original paperwork. Within weeks, the house that Savannah had once called my dream space was legally slipping from her grasp. Savannah didn't take it quietly. The morning the ruling was finalized, Savannah went live on Instagram. She sat on the front steps of the pale blue cottage, hair loose, voice trembling in the way that suggested practice. "Some people," she told her 43,000 followers, "would rather take from their own family than help them grow. Imagine your mother-in-law kicking you out of your home." She blinked, artful gloss catching the light. The comments, however, didn't fall in line. One user wrote, "Isn't that the house she bought you?" Another, "Pay your taxes, babe." And a third, blunt as a gavel. She reclaimed what was hers. That's called consequence. By the next day, Savannah had deleted the video. Meredith, meanwhile, had met with a local nonprofit that specialized in transitional housing for women leaving unsafe situations. She handed them the keys without ceremony. "Make it useful," she said, the faint scent of fresh paint still clinging to the walls. Within a month, the once curated living room was filled with donated books, a play corner for children, and mismatched mugs in the kitchen cabinets. Meredith visited once, quietly, standing in the doorway as a young woman in a faded sundress laughed at something on her phone while stirring soup. It was the right kind of domestic. She updated her personal bio that evening. The old one, retired interior designer, was too small now. She typed, "Interior designer, legacy strategist, accidental icon." Rosa read it over her shoulder and nodded. "Fits you like a tailored jacket," she said. But the quiet satisfaction didn't last. On a heavy, humid afternoon, with the scent of magnolias thick in the air, Meredith heard the metallic buzz of her front gate's intercom. She glanced at the screen. Savannah stood there, sunglasses perched on her head, clutching a leather tote like a shield. The camera's microphone crackled. "We need to talk." Meredith's hand hovered over the intercom button, the breeze from the open window carrying in the distant rumble of thunder. She pressed record instead of speak. Savannah stood at the iron gate in a sheath dress too tight for the heat, sunglasses pushed up like a crown, one manicured finger stabbing the brass button again and again. The intercom camera rendered her in soft black and white. The humidity rendered her human. Cicadas sang in the oaks like a fever. Downstairs, the speaker crackled, "We need to talk." And then again, breathier, like she'd practiced a different tone and couldn't find it in this weather. I watched from the upstairs bay window where the light laid itself across the sill in pale rectangles, and the lace curtain tickled my wrist each time the fan turned. I didn't move toward the stairs. Instead, I picked up my phone and pressed Jamie's name. He answered on the second ring, the way guilty men do. "You knew she was coming," I said. A small, startled inhale. She said she needed closure, Mom." "Closure is what a bank does," I said, not unkindly. "I prefer finality." On the screen, Savannah shifted her weight and tried the button again, then leaned close to the camera and adjusted her mouth into contrition. "Meredith," she called, as if proximity could make her familiar. "Please." I let the house be my answer. The old heart pine floors held my quiet. The air smelled faintly of lemon oil and fresh hydrangeas from the garden. The only sound besides the cicadas was the grandfather clock downstairs, ticking as if it had never once been insulted. "Mom," Jamie tried again, searching for purchase. "Could you just hear her out? She says she wants to fix the narrative." "Stories aren't fixed with apologies offered to an audience," I said. "They're fixed with edits no one sees." Silence. Then, smaller. "I'm trying." "So am I said and hung up. At the gate, Savannah checked her phone, lips moving as she typed. A sheen of sweat gathered at her temple despite the sunglasses' shade. The magnolias along the fence exhaled their waxy sweetness, but even the flowers refused to soften the edges of this. I crossed to my desk and drew out the thick cream stationery I reserved for things that should outlast a password. At the top, I wrote my own name. To Meredith Langston. The pen felt heavier than it had yesterday, as if it understood ceremony. You did not imagine it. The erasure was public. The repair could not be. You owed no performance of pain at the threshold where you were once made to stand. You built the table. You kept the ledger. You turned the page. The sentences arrived as if they had been stacking somewhere inside me, waiting for weather like this. I wrote about the chair, the dog, the trust. the house that had become a home for women who would never hashtag gratitude. I wrote about a boy who had been mine and a man who had deferred himself into absence. I wrote the one thing I had never permitted myself to commit to paper. I am done seeking return on the emotional investments that never paid. When I signed, the nib left a decisive flourish under my name. I folded the letter, slid it into an envelope, sealed it with the Langston wax, and pressed the crest until the impression cooled. On the back, I wrote in small, tidy script, "To be opened only when doubted." Rosa arrived 15 minutes later, summoned by a text so spare it could have been a grocery list. She came in through the side gate like a conspirator, the scent of sunscreen clinging to her tennis whites. We stood together at the upstairs window and watched Savannah thumb at her screen, then try for the 20th time to turn performance into admission. "She wants a scene," Rosa said, mouth tipping. "Don't give her one." "I brought my own," I said, handing her the envelope. Rosa slid on her reading glasses and broke a smile that reached her eyes. "You wrote it to yourself." "No one else qualified," I said. We went downstairs to the small desk by the library where the notary stamp lived in the drawer with odd keys. Rosa inked it, aligned it over the flap with the precision of a surgeon, and pressed down hard enough to thrum through the wood. The seal bloomed, a circle inside which my crest sat unbothered. "Now it's sealed," she said, "in more ways than one." Outside, Savannah finally abandoned pathos for temper. "You can't hide behind your gate forever," she snapped at the camera. "People see what you are." A couple in linen strolled past on the sidewalk and pretended to be invisible. "People see what I do," I murmured. "That will be enough." I walked to the intercom and pressed a button. Not speak, just save. The system filed the footage away next to other small proofs of choice. Then I took the long way back upstairs, touching the banister Jamie once slid down, passing the piano where his left hand never learned patience. The house felt steady underfoot, as if it had decided, finally, to belong to no one's performance. By sunset, Savannah was gone. The gate camera recorded the last of her. Heels clicking fast on the pavement, tote bumping against her hip, a glance back that wanted to be a curse and settled for a flinch. The cicadas quieted. The river wind brought in a little salt. The clock chimed 6, and the sound floated through the rooms like a benediction. I placed the letter to myself in the safety deposit folder marked Reclaimed, tucked between the photo of Jamie at 5 and the deed retrieval that had turned a starter house into a shelter. I poured 2 fingers of bourbon, watched the ice cloud, and let the day compress into a teachable sentence I would never deliver out loud. Some doors are shut from the inside because that's the only way to keep the weather out. Morning came clean and white. Sun squared itself on the floorboards. Rosa arrived early with croissants and a grin sharp enough to slice one. She set her phone on the counter and spun it so I could see. An email from the Secretary of State. Subject line: Entity status change. Reed Atelier, LLC. The message was brief, bureaucratic, beautiful. "This is to notify you that the above-referenced entity has been administratively dissolved for failure to cure deficiencies and continued misuse of contested mark." Rosa raised her coffee. "Finality," she said. I tapped the screen once, as if it were a bell. Savannah's business, her last remaining piece, had been dissolved by the state. There was nothing left to inherit but silence. The folding chairs were gone. The velvet dog cushion was gone, and in its place, on a polished oak platform at the Charleston Civic Hall, stood a high-backed, deep green velvet chair, flanked by brass reading lamps and a table stacked with fresh paper. My seat. My choosing. My making. The first workshop had started as an experiment. 5 women in a library meeting room, coffee in paper cups. Me showing them how to draft powers of attorney and rewrite wills so their names, not their in-laws, survived the paperwork. Now, the sign out front read, Legacy Planning for Women Who Refuse to Disappear. With Meredith Langston. 50 chairs filled before the start, and the air was warm with perfume, ballpoint pens, and the faint rustle of legal pads. On stage, I adjusted my papers and caught the reflection of the room in the brass lamp base, women leaning forward, already writing down the opening quote I'd given them. A name is an inheritance you get to keep or give away. Decide before someone else does. Between sessions, I walked through the aisles, the scent of peonies from the stage arrangement mingling with the faint tang of toner from the printed workbooks. One woman gripped my hand and whispered, "Your story made me change my beneficiaries." My son-in-law still hasn't noticed. Her smile was small but steady. Victory doesn't always roar. It wasn't just the workshops. Law schools were now teaching my story as a case study in defensive estate strategy, a phrase I'd never planned to pioneer. An adjunct from the University of South Carolina sent me a copy of her lecture slides, my name under best practices in asset recovery. It was strange and oddly satisfying to see my wedding humiliation turned into bullet points for aspiring attorneys. Then came the profile. The November issue of Southern Grace featured me on page 42, under the headline, "The Woman Who Reclaimed Her Name." The photo shoot had been in my garden, roses in full bloom, me in a linen dress the color of champagne. No mention of the dog. No need. Anyone who'd heard the story knew. A week later, a letter arrived. Handwritten, the way gratitude ought to be. Jamie's handwriting, slanted left, like mine, on heavy cream stationery. I read the first line. No requests this time, just thanks. Then I closed it. It joined the others in my unopened correspondence folder, tucked between deeds and trust amendments. That folder wasn't for letters I'd never read. It was for moments I didn't need to process right away. Some gifts are meant to sit until you have the appetite. That evening, I passed the photo wall in the hall. Black and white candids, wedding shots, graduations. Now, every frame held faces that had earned their place. Friends, students. Rosa with her wine glass mid-toast. Not one picture had been removed in anger. They'd been replaced in restoration. Rosa came for supper, bringing a bottle of Viognier and a stack of legal envelopes. "You've got another seminar request," she said, sliding them across the table. "And 2 estate law podcasts want you as a guest." "I'll take one," I said, "and let the other fight for next month. I have a life to run." We ate at the dining table I'd taken back from Savannah's walk-in closet, its mahogany surface warm in the candlelight. The crystal glasses, once wrapped in tissue at their wedding registry, caught the flame and threw it in small circles on the wall. After Rosa left, I poured the last inch of wine and stood by the open window, the night air salted from the harbor. The street was quiet except for a bicycle bell in the distance and the slow hum of a ceiling fan upstairs. I turned to lock the window and saw it, the heavy cream envelope on the console table, placed there during the mail sort I'd done without thinking. This one wasn't from a student or a university. The return address was printed, bold, corporate, Elysian Events Group. Inside, on thick embossed cardstock, it read, "We would be honored if you would serve as keynote speaker at the annual Restoration Gala, sponsored by—" I didn't need to finish the sentence. I knew that sponsor. Savannah's ex-sponsor, the one who had pulled out after my trust announcement. The lawyer's conference room smelled faintly of leather and fresh copies, the kind of sterile calm where endings are bound and beginnings are dated. Meredith sat at the head of the table beside Rosa, the window spilling Charleston light across a neat fan of documents. Her signature, clean, decisive, marched down the pages like a procession. "Final disposition," the attorney said, tapping the title page. "All principal and residuals to the Langston Women's Endowment and affiliated leadership funds. No carve-outs, no side letters." Good, Meredith replied. No second drafts. Rosa slid a slim, linen-bound book from her bag and placed it on top of the trust binder. And this, she said softly. On the cover, in blind emboss, 2 words, unsent letters. Inside were the drafts Meredith had written over years of quiet, apologies she never owed, explanations she was never asked to give, memories she had preserved like pressed flowers. Letters to the boy with the gap tooth and the man who learned to keep his mouth shut in rooms that required a spine. None of them mailed. All of them true. Jamie gets nothing else, Meredith said, not unkindly. But he gets the only thing that teaches. The attorney made a note. Savannah? Not even mention, she said. Silence is a boundary, too. By noon, the estate was a finished symphony. Signatures notarized, copies collated, the original sealed in a fireproof pouch that closed with a sound like satisfaction. Outside, the heat laid a soft hand over the city. Inside, a pen clicked shut, and a last page turned. That evening, the ballroom at the Restoration Gala smelled of citrus polish, candle wax, and a whisper of peonies. The sponsor's logo, the one that had once lived under Savannah's posts, now floated discreetly on a screen behind the dais where Meredith's name appeared alone. She wasn't there to gloat. She was there to witness what the future looked like when it wore the right last name. Young women in borrowed gowns and sensible heels moved through the room with careful joy. At her table, Rosa sat in deep navy, a pair of glasses hanging from a gold chain, her expression a blend of mischief and pride. Across from them, Ava, award-winning alum and now a rising attorney, explained her latest case to a girl who had taken 2 buses to attendance and still arrived early. When the servers brought the first course, little bowls of chilled peach soup shot through with basil, Meredith's hand hovered above the linen for a second. She saw, in the movement, a reminder of an old table where no one set a place for her. She chose this one. Ms. Langston, a young woman said, stopping shyly at her elbow. I wanted to say, your workshop made me cancel 3 credit cards and open a savings account. I know that's small. It's an empire, Meredith said. You just can't see the borders yet. The girl laughed, startled, and slipped away, steadier. When the awards began, the room leaned forward. A woman in a red dress accepted a grant to expand her nonprofit for foster youth aging out of the system. Another announced she was starting an apprenticeship program in a trade school where daughters had been told for generations that their hands were too small, their dreams too big. They said thank you into the microphone and looked toward Meredith's table like a compass point. Between courses, the MC asked Meredith to stand. She did. Slowly, dignified, in a black column dress that made her height look like a verdict. The applause came up like heat from the floor. She lifted one hand in acknowledgement and sat again, not because she needed to, but because thrones are sometimes chairs you don't have to defend. On the break, Rosa handed her a sealed envelope. Courier delivered while you were on stage, she said, lips curved. The handwriting across the front was Jamie's, leaning left, careful. Meredith ran her thumb over the edge, then placed it into the unopened correspondence section of her clutch, alongside a pen and a pressed hydrangea petal. Later, she told herself. Or never. Not everything requires a reader. Dessert arrived as a trio of small things executed perfectly. A lemon tart so bright it startled, a square of chocolate like a secret, and a spoon of something that tasted like summer. The lights softened. The band tuned a lazy instrumental in the corner. Rosa rose with her glass and cleared her throat. To the woman who gave everything and took back what mattered, she said, voice ringing the way good toasts do. To the name that means something again. The table raised their glasses. Crystal chimed. Meredith stood. She didn't lift her voice so much as place it. Not revenge, she said, letting the words find the back of the or room. Restoration. A hush followed. A good hush, the kind that means a truth has been installed where a wound used to be. Somewhere at a table near the exit, a girl wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and smiled at no one. When the speeches ended and the band slid into something lazy and hopeful, Meredith stepped away to the edge of the room. She could see them all from here. The mentees, the mentors, the women whose inheritances would be influence and phone calls returned and rooms arranged to receive them. She thought of the first day at the vineyard, the dog in the bow tie, the way humiliation had tried to make her small. She looked down at the program, where the endowment's crest sat clean and fierce next to her name. She didn't think of chairs anymore. She thought of doors. How some lock behind you and some open to halls you didn't know existed until you refused to sit at the wrong table ever again. Her phone buzzed. A message from the attorney, a final digital echo of the morning's signatures, executed and filed. She slid it into her bag without answering. There was nothing left to confirm. The future had already begun without their permission. Rosa appeared at her side, slipped her arm through Meredith's, and steered them back to the laughter. "Come on," she said. "We built this one. Might as well enjoy the view." Meredith took one last look at the room full of claimants to a legacy she had chosen, then let herself be led back to her seat. She didn't need the past to clap for her. The present was loud enough. "They gave my seat to the dog. I gave my name to the future."